So here we are in Holyoke, Massachusetts on a portion of South Race Street, and we're going to do this video on all the missing mills down in this section of South Race Street, and there were many of them. There were 4 right around here, plus 1 right underneath 391 on Main Street itself. And if you want to talk about these mills, I'll tell you in general, most people called them. They were the General Electric, the Holyoke Paper Company, the Germania Mill number 1, and then the Conner Brothers Woolen Mill. And that one they took over from the New York Woolen Mill. There also was the Baby Holbrook after the Conner Brothers moved out. There were so many things moving around this section. Germania took over the General Electric Mill, and I'm going to show you each of those 4 locations. There's nothing much here anymore, but it was one of the big nodes. So my partner, my helper, did research with me, and we found out about that Conner Brothers because that was a very hard one to figure out. Very few people know anything about it, and what she found out, she's going to tell you right now.
So the Conner Brothers Woolen and Shoddy Mill are the makers of cashmeres, overcoating, cloakings, wool shoddies, flax, extracts, wool waste, gig, and sheared flax.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we're going to go to these 4 different locations. First one to the oldest one of all. Okay, and the oldest one of all is the is the Holyoke Paper Company Mill. It was on this green space right here. It's from 1855. It's the 3rd oldest mill in Holyoke. Almost everyone knows, if they know anything about the canal, they know about the Lyman Mill and the Hadley Mill. Those were the first 2 made by the Holyoke Water Power Company. But in 1855, only 5 years after Holyoke became a city, after 7 years of the canal's existence, the 3rd finally came in, and it was a paper mill, the Holyoke Paper Mill. And there was a worker at that location called William Whiten, and he would work at the Holyoke Paper Mill as an accountant, but he would realize that he could do the same thing, right? And so he started up his mill based upon what he learned here. Hardly anyone knows about the Holyoke Paper Mill. Okay, so that's the first quadrant of these 4 missing mills in this area. Across the street and across the canal both, there was a second mill, and it was enormous. It was gigantic. It was a General Electric. It probably came to Holyoke in the 1920s. It stayed in Holyoke to the 1950s, and then they sold out, and Germania took over as its second mill, and it's not there anymore. One of the things that people always remember about General Electric is that at Christmas time in December, they had a giant Santa Claus on the roof of the General Electric Mill that was on train tracks. It would move around, and it would flash different colored lights, and Santa would have his reindeer in front. And quite the display, and this is where it all took place. All right, many people have told me, oh, my father worked there. Can you tell me where it was? You see pictures of it? Sure. Okay, now the next missing mill is the Germania number 1. The Germania 2 is in the distance, and that Germania 2 is on the other side of Interstate 391. But Germania 1 was in a bit of land right there. There's now the Dunham bus company is there, but that's a big plot of land, and they would own all that land. They would be taken over by the Livingston Wool Company, and I believe it was in 1936 they were taken over. And that was taken down in 1981, I believe, when the interstate came around. Okay, now the 4th quadrant is the most interesting of all. The reason why it's very interesting is because many very unique companies came and had their business at this spot. But I'm going to show you one thing before we go over there. All right, down on the right side of that bridge on Main Street at that intersection, there's now an overpass, and there's a place owned by the Department of Public Works. That plot right there used to be the Holyoke Envelope Company. They'd make 1 million envelopes per day. And that was for decades and decades they did that. Many people had to write back then, and they had the need for a great amount of envelopes. That was the biggest envelope maker in the world. They didn't make their own paper, they just made the envelopes for it. Okay, this is the start of the third level canal. You can see it going off in the distance. There's a branch canal up there coming out of the Merrick Mills number 1. Okay, on the other side is one of the spillways, and down there is a power station feeding water into there. All right, so a lot of water is agitated here by the turbine and by the spillway. But our last goal is to see the 4th mill at this quadrant section, the missing 4 mills. And so we're going to go off to this last corner. And the first mill to come in here was the New York Woolen Mill, ran by a man from New York City. He would make, of course, wool and similar products. Okay, it was in this big gap of land that is underneath 391 now, and also heading towards Lower South Street. Okay, now he sold out to a person named James Conner and his brother, and what they did was they made wool products, cashmere and so forth. We've already stated a few of them that we have found out. The Conner brothers were so successful that they started up a second mill at the big plot of land behind the William Skinner Silk Mill. Right, so this New York wool mill is pretty large. All right, and the Conner brothers made it larger. They expanded the mill from 1 to mill 2. Okay, then they sold this mill number 1 and kept mill number 2 going out to about 1900 something. And this place was taken over by the Baby Holbrook Woolen Mill. And Arthur Baby and his father had started up their own paper company, the Baby Holbrook Paper Company. And here they started at the Baby Weber Woolen Mill. And it was successful, and Arthur Baby got quite rich off of this. So this is wool mill. There's nothing here anymore, but you can have to imagine. I have pictures and I have a lot of text about what they did and a lot of their history. Okay, so I've shown you this missing 4 mill quadrant, which was a very important node. You remember it had the 3rd mill ever put into Holyoke, and that was a paper mill. Okay, and I'm showing you a bit of the 2nd level canal, and so it's a node at the 2nd into the 3rd level canal with all the features I tell you about. The spillway, the energy location with the turbine, and those 4 mills, that is 4 sections. The upper section above the 2nd level canal, the Germania and General Electric, and then the other lower nodes were the Conner Wool Mill and Shoddy Mill and Cashmere Mill and the Holyoke Paper Company. So very unique items were made here with a wonderful history. So I hope you understand all I've told you today. Thank you.